Good morning, guys, and happy Tuesday. Sorry about yesterday. I was having some internet issues, but I'm sure you guys are all relieved to know that they are resolved now, so I'm able to bring you your week's work. This week, we're going to keep things nice and simple. So if you head into the remote learning folder on Schoology, you will see three things posted in the week of April 20th. So, number one, you will see this video once I have it recorded. Number two, you guys are going to see a PDF copy of the text that we will be looking at this week. So, this week we are looking at chapter 11, which is on money and banking. This week, you guys are only looking at sections 1 and 2. Okay, so that's in there for you. And then lastly, you have your assignments Google Doc down here. So once you click into that, this is what you'll see. You have your essential question for the chapter, you have your objectives, and then you guys have the actual assignment as well. So after reading each section, you guys have 4 comprehension questions to go along with each section. So just come into this doc, type out your responses. Please make sure that you're using complete sentences for these. And when you have finished that up, you guys can head back to Schoology and just make sure that you submit so that I can view your responses and give you your credit for the week. Okay, so I did mention that we have the PDF up here. So if you prefer to independently read, that is an option for you. If you would rather hold off and wait for the remainder of this video as I go through slide by slide, like I said earlier, it will be the same information, just a different way of obtaining it, just a different way of hearing it. So whatever your preference is, you can sit back, watch the rest of this video, or you can kind of click out of this video now after you have your instructions and go ahead and start your reading. All right, so let's get set up here. Just give me 1 second. All right, so like I said, this week we are starting chapter 11, which is on money and banking. Today specifically, we are looking at money, different types of it, different functions of money, and we're also going to be looking at early forms of money, so what's used in history, and we will look specifically at the history of money in the United States as well. We're going to continue on with this conversation. Next week as well, we're going to focus a little bit more on banking and the history, the creation of the national bank in the United States. So if you are a Hamilton fan, next week is for you. So we're going to get started with section 1 now. So I want you guys to take a minute and think about what life would be like if we relied on a barter economy in the United States. So maybe think back to that simulation that we did about a traditional economy, which relies very, very heavily on a barter system, which of course is a moneyless economy that relies on trade. Okay, so it would be pretty complicated, right? Without money, the exchange of goods and services would be greatly hindered because the products some people have to offer are not always acceptable or easy to divide for payment. For example, how could a farmer with, let's say, a bucket of milk obtain a pair of shoes if the cobbler wanted a basket of fish for the pair of shoes that he has just created? Okay, so unless there is a mutual coincidence of wants, meaning that, there are two people that want exactly what the other has and are willing to trade what they have for it, it's really difficult for trade to take place, especially when you are looking at a large scale economy. So life, in fact, is simpler in an economy with money. So getting back to that example, that farmer can sell the milk for cash and then exchanges the cash for shoes. The cobbler can then take the cash that he has received from that transaction and he looks for someone who is selling fish to, fulfill that want that he has. So money, as it turns out, makes life easier for everybody in ways that maybe we have never thought about before. Oops, sorry guys, lost my place. Okay, so money, what is it? Money can be any substance that serves as a medium of exchange, a measure of value, and a store of value. We will talk about what those three terms mean over the course of the next few slides. Just bear with me. But if it satisfies these three functions, it will be accepted and used by everyone in a society. So we're going to start off by looking at medium of exchange. Okay, so of the three functions of money, this is the first we're looking at. So for something to function as money, it must serve as a medium of exchange, something that is accepted by all parties as payment for goods and services. Throughout history, societies have used many materials as a medium of exchange, including gold, silver, even salt, in ancient Rome specifically. Okay, so let's look at measure of value. A common denominator that can be used to express worth in terms that most individuals understand. So, this is what we observe whenever we see a price tag on something. It is a value that we can use to make comparisons with other products. Okay, so for example, in the United States, our measure of value is expressed in dollars and cents. It's really standard that across the country, you see a product that's sold for X number of dollars, X cents, and you're able to compare that to maybe similar products to make sure that you're getting a good deal, perhaps, because it's a uniformed measure and it's widely accepted across the entire country. And then lastly, the third function that we're looking at is store of value. So, for something to function as money, it must also serve as a store of value, which is the property that allows purchasing power to be saved until needed. So, for example, goods or services can be converted into money, which is easily stored until needed. Money enables a period of time to pass between earning and spending an income. Okay, so that just means that, when you are working your job and let's say you get your paycheck direct deposited, you don't have to worry about that money losing its value per se. That it's going to store its value. It's not something that's perishable, for example, that has a time limit or an expiration on it. All right, so next we're going to look at early forms of money, okay, or money in early societies specifically. So the use of money developed because, like we talked about earlier, it makes life easier for people. Money comes in an incredible variety of forms, shapes, and sizes. Tea leaves compressed into bricks comprised money in ancient China, and compressed cheese was used in early Russian trade. Um, some people use all types of varieties um, of products, whether it's inherently valuable or not. And today, this money would be classified as commodity money. So, money that has an alternative use as an economic good or a commodity. So, for example, those compressed tea leaves would be made into tea when they are not needed for trade. Other items become fiat money, which is money by government decree. So, fiat money has value simply because the government states that it does. So, an older example of fiat money would be, tiny metallic coins used in Asia Minor in the 7th century. These coins served as money largely because the government, again, said they were money. They have value because the government says so. The use of money became accepted because it served everyone's best interests to do so. In this sense, money was then and is now a social convention, much like the general acceptance of laws in government. Okay, so let's look specifically at money in colonial America. The money used by early settlers in America was similar to the money found in some of those early societies that I just mentioned. Some of it was commodity money, and some of it was fiat money. Many products, including gunpowder, Musket balls, corn served as commodity money. It could be used to settle debts and make purchases, or it could even be, uh, used in alternative ways if necessary. So they had multiple uses more than just an accepted form of currency. A commonly accepted commodity money in colonial America was tobacco. Tobacco being very common, specifically in Virginia, and it was also very, very valuable as well. Other colonies established fiat monies. So, one of the first examples of this is in 1645. Connecticut set a monetary value for wampum, which was a form of currency from the Native Americans made out of white conch and black mussel shells. Because white shells were more plentiful than the black ones, and because the Native American settlers used them in trade, one English penny was made equal to 6 white or 3 black shells. And sometimes there was, excuse me, guys. Sorry, some time passed, and Americans started to use other forms of money. In some cases, states allowed individuals to print their own paper currency. These were typically backed by gold and silver deposits and banks, and it served as currency for the immediate area. So this wouldn't be widespread. Paper money was issued to finance the Revolutionary War. It's another really good example. 1775, continental dollars, a form of paper currency, so fiat currency, with no gold or silver backing, were printed by the Continental Congress. By the end of the war, however, nearly $250 million continental dollars had been printed to pay soldiers and buy supplies, a volume that was so large that it was virtually worthless by the end of the Revolution. And then lastly, we have specie as an early form of money. So specie is money in the form of coins made from gold and silver. So these include English shillings, Australian thalers, and various European coins that immigrants brought to the colonies. Coins were the most desirable form of money, not only because of their mineral content, but because they were in limited supply. By 1776, only $12 million in specie circulated in the colonies, as compared to the nearly $500 million that circulated in paper currency. Just give me 1 second here. All right, sorry about that. Next, we're going to look at 4 characteristics of money. So the first is portability. First and foremost, money must be portable or easily transferred from one person to another to make the exchange of money for products easier. Next is durability. Money must also be reasonably durable so that it lasts when it's handled and does not deteriorate when being held as a store of value. Next is divisibility. Money should be easily divisible into smaller units so that people can use only as much as needed for any transaction. And then lastly, there needs to be limited availability. So if something is to serve as money, it must be available, but not only in limited supply. Oops, nope, I misspoke, but only in limited supply, I'm sorry. Because again, let's take the previous example of specie. So coins were most desirable during colonial America because they were in limited supply. So there was $12 million in supply compared to the $500 million of paper currency that was being circulated. And of course, that means that the coins have more value. If something is readily available, it's not going to be an effective form of currency or money. All right, so we're going to move on to section 2, which is early banking and monetary standards. So during the Revolutionary War, nearly 250 million continental dollars were printed. After the revolution, like we talked about earlier, continental currency was worthless, and people did not trust the government to issue anything except coin. So this is even included in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. It addresses this matter because, again, there was such an upset because of this continental currency that was issued. So, because of the clauses that were included in the Constitution, the federal government did not print paper currency until the Civil War. Instead, the paper money supply was left for private banks to produce. So, state banks were permitted to print paper money, and as a result, they were on the rise. Um, by about 1811, the country had about 100 state banks, which were banks that received their charter to operate from a state government. State banks issued their own currency by printing their notes at local printing shops, typically. The banks then put these notes in circulation with the assurance that people could exchange them for gold or silver if they ever lost faith in the bank or its currency. That sounds great in theory, right? However, there were abuses in this system. So, at first, most banks printed only the amount of currency they could reasonably back with their gold and silver reserves. Others, however, were not as honest and became known as wildcat banks. So, wildcat banks were, those fraudulent banks that printed large amounts of currency in remote areas to make the redemption of their currency difficult. These banks got their name from people who claimed that you had to be a wildcat to get to them. Okay, so even when banks were honest, problems with the currency arose. First, each bank issued its own currency in different sizes, colors, and denominations. As a result, hundreds of different kinds of notes could be in circulation at any given time and in any given city. Second, because a bank could print more money whenever it wanted, the temptation to issue too many notes always existed. Third, counterfeiting became a major problem. With so many different types of notes in circulation, many counterfeiters did not even bother to copy other notes. Instead, they simply made up their own. By the Civil War, though, the United States had more than 1,600 banks issuing more than 10,000 kinds of paper currency. Each bank was supposed to have backing in the form of gold or silver, but this was seldom the case. As a result, when people tried to buy something, merchants would often check their notes against the latest listing of good and bad currencies before deciding which ones to accept in payment. So the note that you might have, whether or not it would be accepted, was largely up to the discretion of the specific merchant. So again, it's really, really unreliable. This was not an incredibly trustworthy system because it might meant that people weren't able to get what they needed. So we're going to look at the greenback standard. By the 1850s, the paper currency component of the money supply was badly in need of overhaul. Politically powerful local bankers, however, resisted change until, of course, the Civil War, which was, this event that came along that was going to change banking forever in the United States. So when the Civil War erupted, both the Union and the Confederacy needed to raise enormous sums of money to finance the war. Congress tried to borrow money by selling bonds, but this did not raise as much money as the federal government needed. So as a result, Congress decided to print paper currency for the first time since the Constitution was adopted. In 1861, Congress authorized the printing of 60 million notes. Although these notes had no gold or silver backing, they were declared legal tender, which is fiat currency that must be accepted in payment for debts. So again, it is valuable because the government says so. So essentially, the Confederacy does largely the same thing. They begin to print paper currency, this fiat currency, in order to fund their end of the war as well. So as the war persisted, people feared that greenbacks, just like the continental dollars, would uh, also become worthless as well, that they would lose their value. When in fact the greenbacks did lose some of their value, people avoided using them, forcing Congress to find another way to finance the war. So their solution was to create something called the National Banking System, or the NBS. So the national banking system was made up of national banks, privately owned banks that received their operating charters from the federal government. These banks issued national banknotes or national currency. So, paper currency of uniform appearance that was backed by United States government bonds. The government hoped that rigorous bank inspections and other high standards and regulations would help give people confidence in the new NBS and its currency. This backing, so by using bonds to back the currency, it made it seem more secure to the public. It also generated a new demand for war bonds because any group that wanted to set up a national bank had to first purchase government bonds as a part of the requirement to get the national charter. The bonds were then put on deposit with the United States Treasury as backing against the currency. Initially, few state chartered banks joined the system because it was easier for them to print their money at a local printer than it was to join the NBS. However, in 1865, the federal government forced state banks to join the NBS by placing a 10% tax on all privately issued banknotes. Because state chartered banks could not afford the tax, they withdrew their notes, leaving only the greenbacks and national currency in circulation. So, as a result of the need to finance the Civil War, the makeup of the money paper supply shifted from being entirely privately issued to being entirely publicly issued. So, next, we're going to look at gold certificates and silver certificates. Where am I? The removal of more than 10,000 different sizes and denominations of state banknotes simplified the currency system. Before long, however, new types of federal currency appeared. And like I said, we're going to be looking at gold certificates and silver certificates as an example of that. By 1863, the government issued gold certificates, which were paper currency backed by gold placed on deposit with the United States Treasury. At first, these certificates were printed in large denominations for banks to use when settling differences with each other at the end of the business day. In 1882, however, the government began printing gold certificates in smaller denominations for public use. In 1878, the government introduced silver certificates, which was paper currency backed by, you guessed it, silver dollars. That was placed on reserve with the Treasury. Silver certificates were modeled after the highly popular gold certificates, but they were really designed to prop up sagging silver prices for Western silver miners. Oops. All right, so by 1900, Congress passed the Gold Standard Act, fixing the price of gold at $20.67 an ounce. For the first time, the United States was on a gold standard, which is a monetary standard under which the basic currency unit is equal to and can be exchanged for a specific amount of gold. The Gold Standard Act did not affect the type of currency that people used. People continued to use the same greenbacks, national banknotes, gold certificates, silver certificates, and treasury coin notes as they did before. The difference was that these notes could now be exchanged for gold at the Treasury at any time. So, some advantages associated with the gold standard. People now feel more secure if they know it can be converted into gold. It's kind of like a safety net for them. Another advantage, it is supposed to prevent the government from printing too much paper currency. In theory, the government promises to print only as much currency as can be backed by or exchanged into gold. This keeps the currency relatively scarce and it helps to maintain its value. In reality, however, the United States never did have enough gold to back all of its currency. This is normally the case whenever a country goes on a gold standard because it is unlikely that everyone will want to convert all of their currency into gold at the same time. Consequently, it is usually sufficient to maintain the appearance of having enough gold to back the paper money. So let's look at the disadvantages of the gold standard. So one disadvantage is that the gold stock may not grow fast enough to support a growing economy. If new gold supplies cannot be found, the money supply may not be able to expand, thereby restricting and limiting economic growth. A second disadvantage is that people may suddenly decide to convert their currency into gold, thereby draining the government's gold reserves. This can easily happen if a government is trying to maintain the appearance of having enough gold, when in fact it does not. Third, we know that the price of gold is likely to change dramatically over time if it is not fixed. Sorry, guys, I lost my place. That means that any government that tries to fix the price of gold by buying and selling unlimited amounts at an official price will face a tremendous amount of market pressure. And then lastly, there is always the political risk of failure. So a government that announces an official price for gold looks ineffective if it cannot carry out its intentions. Oops. So the gold standard remains in effect until the Depression of the 1930s, when banks began to fail in record numbers. Because of the uncertain times and because people felt safer holding gold, so something that's inherently valuable, rather than paper currency, they began to cash in their dollars for gold. Foreign governments with large holdings of dollars began to do the same thing. Oops. Okay, so the inconvertible fiat money standard. So since 1934, the United States has been on an inconvertible fiat money standard, which is a monetary standard under which the fiat money supply cannot be converted into gold or silver by its citizens. So the money supply of the United States, like those of major industrial countries in the world, is managed by money supply. In other words, the government or its designated agent controls the quantity, consumption, and even the quality of the money supply. The task is somewhat easier now that there is a single currency issued by the Federal Reserve System and has replaced the multiple currencies that appeared after the Civil War. National currency and treasury coin notes were withdrawn from circulation in the 1930s, and gold certificates were confiscated in 1934. The last issue of the United States notes, or those greenbacks, took place in 1968. Silver certificates were also retired, and the government stopped redeeming them for silver dollars in 1968. Americans have been allowed to own gold and silver certificates since 1975, but neither is officially part of the money supply today. So we're going to look at the characteristics of modern money that we currently rely on in today's society, in today's economy. So the first is that modern money must be portable. So currency is lightweight, it is convenient, and can be easily transferred from one person to another. The same applies to the use of checks as well. Next, modern money is reasonably durable. Metallic coins last about 20 years under normal use. Paper currency is also reasonably durable, with a $1 bill usually lasts about 18 months in circulation, if not longer. Modern money is divisible. So the penny, which is the smallest denomination of coin, is small enough for almost any purchase. In addition, checks can be written for the exact amount. And then lastly, limited availability and stability in value. So this one has, kind of an uneven track record. So the money supply often grew at a rate of 10 to 12% a year in the early 1970s, which contributed greatly to the inflation of the period. It slowed considerably after that, contributing to the period of relative price stability in the 1990s. So we're going to start looking at, inflation and price stability in a little bit more detail in the coming weeks. But like I said, next week we're going to focus on the creation of the national bank. We're going to look at the Federal Reserve System. And then in the following weeks, we're going to start looking at, the patterns that money follows. Excuse me. All right. So that wraps up sections 1 and 2, the notes that I have for you guys. Again, if you need to go back to anything, just feel free to rewind in this video, pause when you need it, and make sure that you head to Schoology to complete your Google Doc assignment, which will be due Sunday by 11:59 p.m. It is 9:30 in the morning now. I will upload this video, and I will have office hours starting at 11 this morning. If any of you guys have any questions or would like to pop on to say hi. Have a great week, guys. Hope to hear from you soon.